The book is a second edition of Investor-State Arbitration. This is a case book slash monograph which covers A to Z of Investor-State Arbitration. In terms of developments, the book, the structure is the same. It starts with some historical background in the field of protection of foreign investment, introduces institutions, rules, and there are 2 long chapters dedicated to the process of investor-state arbitration, and then goes in detail to discuss main substantive provisions in investment treaties like expropriation, fair and equitable treatment, national treatment. And in this edition, we also have added some new chapters, one on transfer of funds, one on jurisdiction ratione temporis. And the book, we have also completely rewritten our damages chapter. We have a long chapter on annulment and enforcement, and ending with a chapter on enforcement of arbitral awards. In the first edition, we had a chapter on future. That no longer is there. We merged it into chapter 1. There are so many developments, very fast developments in the field that really have we thought it's more efficient to discuss these things in one place. There is 12 years gap, almost 11 years gap between the first and second edition, and there has been a major developments in this period, a lot of cases, a lot of estate practice, new treaties, and some of the probably most important events in the life of this field is happening now. One of them is, for example, reform of the investor-state arbitration, which is taking place at the Ancestral Working Group 3, and that's probably trying to address some of the most important challenges to the system of investor-state arbitrations. The states are working on it, and obviously the views are divided. We have on one side the European Union trying to fix the system by introducing a court model, and on the other side we have a number of states that they think that there are incremental changes to the system, like providing more transparency or a code of ethics for arbitrators. Those would resolve some of these problems. So this is all in the making, and in parallel with all of these things, ICSID has been amending its rules. And for us, updating this book, that is obviously that was a major challenge, because we needed to get a sense of, okay, to what extent we need to cover these amendments. We ultimately decided that this is very long term, these changes won't appear. So we touched upon them, but we really didn't analyze them. But one of the other challenges here, which really goes back to the nature of all these developments in these fields, was that for example, the US administration changed in 2017, and a lot of policies changed. You know, we have a whole chapter ready almost by then on modern system of investor-state arbitration, which discusses NAFTA and some other multilateral investment treaties, among other topics. And we had to significantly change that, because now we have a NAFTA too. And we had a very long section on TPP, and then United States government decided to pull out. We had to amend all of those on the go and turn it into TPP 11, and we kind of change. And changes of this nature, obviously they created ongoing challenges. The rest of it was pretty much critical review of every issue and every chapter with an eye on determining what is relevant for practitioners and academics today. You know, history obviously is important. We have a chapter on history. We didn't rewrite the history, I can tell you. We left, that's our chapter 2. But a lot of other developments, practices and developments in the new rules in the last 10 years or state practice had rendered them less important. So we eliminated them from the book. But making that decision to really kind of cut short and take things out, that was a hard thing because they were part of the main book. But we managed to do that, to make it keep it short. I mean, by short, I mean below 900 pages. And that was our objective. I think we accomplished that. And on point. So anyone who wants to do a case today, they pick it up. Oh, these are the relevant authorities. And if you want to go and look some of the historical discussion, obviously the first edition is there, and they can go and look into those. Updating this book gave us an opportunity to get a snapshot of various things, and I became interested in a number of topics, but I think evolution of the concepts and law is what really excites me. There are several examples of it. One of them, which was very interesting for me, was with respect to the notion of property interest in indirect expropriation analysis. I mean, in the first edition of the book, we had a section on that, and we were starting the section by quoting a Hague Academy lecture of the Judge Higgins on notion of property, but it was mainly focused on exploring whether there is a notion of property rights in international law. And so when an investor brings a claim, how are you going to determine whether they have a property that would qualify as an investment under a treaty? And now, 10 years gone, a number of cases, a number of commentaries, and right now it has more or less become clear through the case law that you would look into domestic law to determine the scope of the property rights, and that dimension of whether there is a notion of property in international law probably has to stay a little bit maybe in the future or maybe in other fields, but in investment arbitration, at least it seems clear that under the current regime, that's what it is. So that was very interesting for me. Other interesting developments, which again are on evolution of the law or practice of the states, their understanding of what these treaties are, I think, related to the notion of MFN. You know, MFN has been controversial, particularly its application to the procedural rights, which we discussed in detail in the first edition of the book. And in the second edition, now we have a new strand of cases that, or practices that are coming up involving trying to limit the application of MFN on substantive points, and they're essentially trying to prevent importation of provisions, using MFN to import provisions. Rather, MFN is used only to prevent actual discrimination between investors. So these are very fascinating for me in terms of how this field has been evolving, and there are many, many more examples that I can talk about it. I can say I enjoyed everything, but if I want to pick one topic, I think the denunciation was very interesting for me. And part of that is because topics in international law, they become relevant at a particular juncture. They may become less relevant, and then they become important again at a different juncture. And denunciation is one of those topics that maybe about 10 years ago, there were a lot of denunciations of the ICSID Convention, terminations of bilateral investment treaties, and that has now a new dimension. These are essentially unilateral or bilateral termination of bilateral investment treaties or consent to arbitration. It's very current. I think a lot of European countries are struggling with it. A number of arbitral tribunals currently dealing with the consequences of ACMEA. They need to kind of get into detail to deal with that. And we see how the jurisprudence would evolve. And I thought that's for that very reason, the denunciation session was very interesting and refreshed my mind about some of those fundamental concepts, that how a unilateral act works and what are the consequences of the bilateral agreements to renounce the treaties.